I'm Gabe Lyons, the founder of Q, and we created Q to help Christians know how to engage our cultural moment. And we're living through quite a moment right now where the church is really asking a lot of questions about what is its role in a society that no longer regards religion with a lot of respect. Maybe people just abandon religion in general. A new generation questions whether it has any relevance to their life, or maybe that it's a bigger part of the problem. And so many Christians are left knowing, how do we raise our children? How do we think about community? How do I think about my work? And how do I live a public life? Does this need to be privatized, or can I engage well with my gifts and my talents and my concerns in the public square? And so with those questions at Q, we want to help you go on a journey with us to better understand what are the 6 ways the church has always shown up in any kind of culture. Not just the one we're in today, but historically we've seen a pattern of faithfulness where the church responds to any cultural moment we find ourselves in. But many of us maybe have never heard this, maybe we've forgotten it. Maybe even for pastors and church leaders, you need to take a moment to revisit our unique history. There's no one better to walk us through this than Dr. Greg Thompson. He's studied cultural change over the last decade. He understands history, he understands theology, and most important, he understands how ideas actually shape our public square and our public life. In addition to that, he's actually pastored and led a church and understands what it means for the church to show up in the moment. So join with us to sit and learn and understand how we can be faithful in this cultural moment.
So one of the most beautiful, if burdensome, responsibilities in the Christian church in every single age is the responsibility to reimagine the faithfulness of its own presence. Now, I say that it's burdensome because it actually requires us to look honestly at ourselves, at the faithfulness of our lives with God and our lives with our neighbors. And it also requires us to look honestly at this age, at the intellectual sources of our age and at the institutional structures of our age and all the individual experiences that we have. So it's a burden to have consistently to reimagine our presence in this world. But it's also beautiful, and it's important that we know that, because in understanding ourselves, we get to learn again what God has made of us and what he has yet to make of us. And in understanding our age, we get to learn again what God has made of the world and what he has yet to make of the world. And when we see these things, the kind of gorgeous outlines of a reimagined Christian faithfulness begin to come into view. And what I want to do is I want to step into this burdensome and beautiful work of reimagining faithful Christian presence in our own time. And I want to ask you to join with me, and here's how. I want you to imagine a woman. Let's say she lived sometime between the 2nd century and the 16th century, broad period of history. And let's say she lived somewhere, generally speaking, in the region of the Mediterranean. She could live as far south as northern Africa. She could live as far east as modern Iraq. She could live as far north as northern France, or even England or Scotland, and as far west as modern Spain. Now I want you to imagine that she is, out of some terrible necessity, obliged to make her way on a journey across the remoteness of that world. So she leaves whatever shelter is hers, she wraps herself in a cloak or cloth, and she steps out into the dark and into this restless wind. Can you see her? And as she steps onto her path and she bends her long and lonely course towards whatever town or village or city held her hopes, in all likelihood, she spent her days scanning the horizon for one thing. And do you know what it is? A church. A church. See, sometimes these churches were huge cathedrals. They were rising up in stone and they were filled with light. Sometimes they were small little parishes tucked away and roads that some of you have seen and filled with intimacy and warmth. And sometimes they were monasteries, tucked behind walls, but filled with song. But no matter which kind of church it was, all of them shared a common vocation. And here's what it was: to be the faithful presence of love in their time. To be the faithful presence of love in their time. And this is why she would look for a church. Because of all the things that she could know about the church, the one thing that she would certainly know, that most people did know, was that the church was a place whose very purpose was to be a light in the darkness, was to be a rest for the restless. Its purpose was to be a presence in all the absences of the world. Now, in fact, most of these churches had these manuals written for how you carried out this vocation. You may not know this. They had these codes for how you would receive travelers when they came to you. And I want to read one of my favorites. Okay, this comes from the Benedictine Rule, which was written in the 6th century. Listen to what it says. All guests who present themselves are to be welcomed as Christ. For he himself will say, I was a stranger and you welcomed me. And once a guest has been announced, the superior and the brothers or sisters are to meet with him with all the courtesy of love. The abbot shall pour water on the hands of the guests, and the abbot with the entire community shall wash their feet. Great care and concern are to be shown in receiving poor people and pilgrims, because in them more particularly is Christ received. Isn't that amazing? This is an amazing passage and an amazing document, but there are so many others like this, and all of them are bearing witness to the conviction that the church's vocation is to be a presence in the absences of the world. Now, in our time, it might be difficult to imagine the forms of absence that were experienced by this woman and by the hundreds of thousands of men and women and children who were just like her, but I want you to try. Some who were hungry were driven by the absence of food. Others, diseased, were driven by the absence of care. Some exploited were driven by the absence of justice. Some who were sinners were driven by the absence of grace. Can you see those people making their way and looking for us? And in finding us, what did they find? I love this. On the one hand, they found very personal care, this careful attention to the most intimate needs that human beings have. I want you to think about this, because in our lighted windows, they found the consolation of knowing that they weren't alone. In our open doors, they found the sound and the presence of welcome. In our embrace, they found the return of their dignity. In our kitchens, they found fullness and joy. Think about it, warm bread, stew, the gladness of wine. Inside our walls, inside our rooms, they found the repose of rest. And in our farewells, they found warmer clothes and heavier bags and the benedictions of God for them on their journey. That's what they found. They found very personal care. But they also found public concern, and this is important to understand, because when they came to churches, what they found were communities of men and women who were concerned not just for individuals, but for entire cities. It's our brothers and sisters who began to invent and nurture systems of the moral and intellectual formation of children, who began to develop structures of economics and of law, who began to create art and music for the good of all of their neighbors. So you see public concern. And I want you to try to see our brothers and sisters as they gave themselves, in kitchen and in chapel, in courtroom and in court square, to this work of being the presence of love. Now, as somebody who is a Christian, when I think back on these early stories, and I think about all of the men and the women and the children who came to us in desperation, who looked for us, and I think of all of our brothers and sisters who welcomed them in love, fed them with kindness, and nurtured them in safety, I have to tell you, I find it almost indescribably beautiful. But I also find it incredibly painful. Do you know why? First, because our neighbors are still wandering. In some sense, it's the old wandering. Hundreds of millions of our neighbors still continue to wander in search of food, in search of shelter, in search of justice, in search of grace. These ancient pilgrimages still continue among us. But in another sense, it's a very new wandering, and it's important that we understand this. Because we live in a new age in which there's deep ambivalence about the nature of reality, deep confusion about the nature of reality and identity, deep anxiety about the possibility of our life together in our societies. The age that we live in is no longer an age in which we simply wander down dark roads in the shadows worried about bandits. This is an age in which we wander through an abyss of meaninglessness with incredible forces of political and economic and technological power threatening us at every moment. Ours is an age whose paths are more treacherous and whose powers are much more menacing than anything those early pilgrims ever saw. And so I find it painful because our neighbors are still wandering all these years later. But also, as they wander, they are not looking for us. They are not looking for us. Scholarship on the state of Christianity in the West, whether it's from theologians or social scientists or historians, is uniform in its assertion that historic forms of Christianity are in decline. And of course, the pace and the degree of that decline are different in different states and different parts of the West. But the reality of the decline cannot be in doubt. And so it's important that we understand that this is not simply some historical anomaly. It is for the foreseeable future a settled fact. And while this means many things, one of the things that it means is that even though our neighbors are still wandering, they are not looking for us. And this leads me to the third reason I find it painful. And it's perhaps the most important. And it's that we're not looking for them. That we're not looking for them. See, one of the effects of the shift in culture that I've just described is that the Christian church in the West, especially in the largely white Protestant expression of that church, which has been so identified with the West, has been driven into a form of an identity crisis. And this is totally understandable, right? This is a community who understood itself as a conscious majority, whose vision was widely shared, whose influence was widely felt and sought, whose goals were widely pursued and embraced. But now that community is being asked to live self-consciously as a minority community, whose vision is widely ignored, whose influence is obviously in decline, and whose goals are widely held in derision. It's an identity crisis, and one of the effects of this identity crisis is that the church has begun to think disproportionately about itself, about its own experience of this age rather than its neighbors. And so some, fearing this age, have withdrawn from it, seek to withdraw from it into these communities, these fortified communities of ritualized fear. Others, resenting this age, are now setting themselves against it in this struggle for cultural domination. And still other churches, misapprehending both the perils and the promise of this age, are simply embracing it and celebrating their enlightenment while their neighbors slip into the dark. And this is why these early accounts are so painful to me, because our neighbors are wandering and they are not looking for us, and it is not entirely clear to me that we are looking for them. And if that's true, then that means that the one community whose purpose is to be a presence in this world is in danger of becoming an absence. And so when I look back on these accounts, I see beauty, I see pain, but I also see hope, and it's important that you see it as well. And here's why. Because God loves this world. And because God loves this world, he has promised to be present in every single age of this world, including this age. And he has promised to be present through you, through his church. And so what that means is as we begin the work and take up this work of reassessing and reimagining the nature of Christian faithfulness in our own time, we can do so with the hope that our labors are not in vain. And that's why we're here. So what's it going to mean? What's it going to mean for us to become this presence of love in our own age? And in my own life, I found this question to be overwhelming, because I know that it's going to mean so many things. It's going to require so many things of me, just as it is of you. But over time, I've come to believe that there are 6 basic steps. There are some first steps that we can take, and we can take together in the church if we were going to reimagine the meaning of faithful presence. So what I want to do is I want to walk through these 6 steps in the form of a question. And I want to say that if we are to learn to reimagine Christian faithfulness in our time, we're going to have to ask these questions anew and answer them anew.